international law has been, for the last 3 years, really battered to such an extent that there is little left. It's not that they are violated, they've always been violated. What's happening now is that those who violate the laws claim that the law does not apply. In the past, those who violated the law will say, no, I did not. They will deny. Now, they don't even deny violating the law. They are actually saying, the law does not apply. It does not apply to me.
The world is at a historic juncture. Unprecedented forces are hunting down the ideals of human rights for all, seeking to destroy an international system forged in the blood and grief of World War II and its Holocaust. This religious, racial, patriarchal crusade, which aims for an economic order predicated on even greater inequality between and within states, imperils hard-won equality, justice, and dignity gains of these past 80 years. That's from Amnesty International's 2025 annual report. I'm Adrian Harewood, and this is In Bed with the Elephant. Amnesty International's Secretary General, Agnès Callamard, has been a defender of human rights for most of her life. Her maternal grandfather fought for the French resistance during the Second World War. Callamard was born in 1963 into a lower-middle-class family in a small village in southeastern France, about 60 kilometres north of Avignon. She attended Sciences Po Grenoble for her undergraduate degree, earned a master's in international and African studies at the renowned Howard University, a historically black college in Washington, D.C., where she was one of a handful of white students, an experience she describes as transformative. And she received her PhD at the New School in New York City. Prior to becoming Amnesty's Secretary General, Callamard was the UN's Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial, summary, or arbitrary executions, and the former director of the Columbia University Global Freedom of Expression Project. Agnès Callamard has made a career out of challenging power and trying to end impunity for violations of human rights. In doing her job and making the unaccountable accountable, she's come under fierce attack by autocrats like the Philippines' former president Rodrigo Duterte and Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince and Prime Minister Mohammed bin Salman. In late June 2025, Callamard was in Hungary, along with tens of thousands of revelers, to participate in Budapest Pride celebrations, in defiance of the attempt by the government of Hungary's president, Viktor Orban, to ban the LGBTQ+ event. I sat down with Agnès Callamard in May 2025 at the head office of Amnesty International Canada in downtown Ottawa. We spoke about growing courage, fighting impunity, investigating the murder of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, the current state of human rights in the world, and the ability of Amnesty International to effect change. But we began with her family story.
Your family has known something about the cruelty of the world. Your mother was an orphan, and her father, Léon, was a resistance fighter. Tell us a little bit about who your grandfather was, your family story, and how it has, helped to shape the person you are today.
My grandfather was Léon Savio. I only know what my mother told me about him and some photos. He became a soldier during World War I. At the age of 17, he enrolled. He fought. He came back from the war with his lungs quite very affected. It took him to a very bad space, and he was an alcoholic for quite a while, according to my mother, and partly it was also to ease the pain of the lungs. Came World War II, he enrolled this time in the French resistance and was eventually captured literally 2 days before the end of the war in that particular part of France, Loison, and he was executed on the 15th of August 1945. As a child, every 15th of August, my family and I will go to a memorial that had been erected where he had been executed. And this year, for the first time, I met a very old man who was 8 years old at the time of the execution and was the son of my grandfather's best friend. And he told me that he recalled hearing the machine gun when he was executed. Then with his father, a little while later, they went to look for the body. And they found the body and they covered the body so that it could be buried later on. I just found out that story this year when I went there. The 15th of August was a rhythm to my year, because it was a moment where the entire family met. It was a joyful moment for us kids too, because we were meeting all of the cousins and everything. And it was also a very solemn moment. Sometimes I could see my mother crying. There was very sad music and people getting older and older by the year, speaking about what had happened. So I'm very glad now I'm going there with my nephews, and I know that we will keep the memory. It's not the memory of them per se, although it's part of it. It's really the memory of what people are capable to do in order to fight for what they believe in, for their values, for their country, for their freedom. I think that's something that we should never, ever forget, and something that we should always try to celebrate, particularly right now where there is so much is at stake.
Have you always been a fighter?
Probably, yeah. I was always a pretty feisty little girl, yeah. And come from a family of feisty women too.
Because your mother, as we mentioned that she was an orphan, she didn't have an easy
a very tough
time of it, but she became a social justice advocate.
Yeah, and a school teacher too, like your family. Deeply, she had an inherent love for people, my mother, in spite of everything that had happened to her and the fact that she grew up without love because her mother and then her father died when she was young. She was capable of giving a lot of love, unconditionally, in fact. She had an incredible level of compassion and empathy, and she taught me a bit of it. I learned a lot as I grew old because I was not as loving as she was, I think, when I was younger. But I am understanding much more the power of love and empathy.
How does the power of love, or where does the power of love find itself in the work that you do?
In forgiveness, in understanding, in building bridges, in trusting people, in trying to offer people something that they may not have had. So if you are very Cartesian, like me initially, I think.
Very rational.
Very rational. You will tend to be very oriented towards offering something that may be helpful. But at the end of the day, victims, people who've suffered a lot, what they need first and foremost is to feel loved, is to feel trusted, is to know they are listened to. That's not something that you learn in school. It's something that you must feel and build as you progress, as you get older. That's the power of love. It's about making the other person who may have gone through absolute hell feel that not everything is lost.
Can you learn how to be courageous? Because you have a reputation of being, some people describe you as being fearless. For example, the regime of Saudi Arabia, that your investigation of that regime was something that many other actors might not have been willing to do. So where does that fearlessness come from? Is that something that you always had, or is that something that you've learned, that you've developed over the years?
I think you can learn it a bit, What is courage? Not being aware of the risk does not make you courageous. In fact, I think it's because you are aware of the risk that you can pretend to be courageous. Otherwise, you're just being a risk taker and, So I think you can absolutely learn or being forced into being courageous. Maybe nothing predestinated my grandfather to join at 17-year-old, but he felt compelled by what he was witnessing. And I think it happens to a lot of people. They are not born courageous. They are not They observe, they feel, they think, they get upset, they get angry, and they think one day enough is enough, I'm going to act. So I think, yes, it grows. Courage grows in you. You're not born courageous. It's the circumstances. It's what you have to confront. It's a range of things that brings you to that. When it comes to my investigation into Jamal Khashoggi, I honestly never felt I was being particularly courageous. Why? Because I was working from a fairly safe platform, which is the United Nations.
You were the UN Special Rapporteur.
I was the UN Special Rapporteur. And what courage are we talking about here? The courage to name Saudi Arabia. It's not a hell of a courage. The benchmark to assessing my courage was very low because nobody was daring to mention Saudi Arabia or Mohammed bin Salman. Nobody.
The Crown Prince.
The Crown Prince at the time. But is it really that courageous when you think of it, objectively speaking? I'm talking from the UN. I'm a French person. I have a French passport. And I dare naming Mohammed bin Salman. So I never felt particularly courageous for naming him and saying he was responsible for the killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. But the fact that people thought that was courageous is a very good reflection of the world we lived in. That is, some individuals, some people are so protected by our silence, by our fears, either invented or real. The one person who dares say the king is naked, that person is courageous.
Mm-hmm. Or the king is a killer.
Or the king is a killer.
Mm. You began your job as Secretary General of Amnesty International in 2021. And at that time, you gave an interview to the Guardian newspaper, the British-based Guardian newspaper, in which you painted a rather bleak picture of the state of human rights in the world. That was 4 years ago. Has much changed in the last 4 years?
It has gotten worse, sadly. I need to go back to this interview. The state of the world has gotten worse. And I was already alarmed in 2021 by what I was seeing and analyzing. But I still had hope, and I still do have hope. But when I started at Amnesty, I did feel that there was a lot of space still to reform, not to be forced into reform. I felt that there was space to be thinking of 2048 and reimagine human rights for the future generations. In 2025, we are not in a position to reimagine. We are in a position to have to resist and protect. And we need to save a little space for reform.
Resist and protect from what? How would you describe the state of affairs today?
I will say that the international system is on its knee. International law has been, for the last 3 years, really battered to such an extent that there is little left of it. And here I'm talking about international humanitarian law. I'm talking about international human rights law and genocide law. I think those three bodies of law plus the UN Charter, which is really around aggression, all of those bodies of laws have been so battered. And it's not that they are violated. They've always been violated. What's happening now is that those who violate the laws claim that the law does not apply. In the past, those who violated the law will say, no, I did not. They will deny. They will claim that you don't know what you're talking about. Now, they don't even deny violating the law. They are actually saying the law does not apply. It does not apply to me. It does not apply to my situation. It does not apply to my country. The Genocide Convention does not apply. You are not understanding the Genocide Convention properly.
Is this a new development?
Yeah.
Or have those currents always existed?
I don't recall governments claiming loudly and proudly that the law, that international law, did not apply to them.
So there's a brazenness about it. It's unapologetic.
It's unapologetic, and it is absolutely destructive of the rule-based order. It's destructive of the glue that is supposed to bring us together. It is emptying the content out, because if you're saying that the law does not apply to you, you're basically saying the law does not apply.
And who are we talking about? Because we're not naming names right now. When you talk about the forces these kind of authoritarian forces, who are you talking about?
In that case, when it comes to international law, I'm talking in particular about Russia, suggesting or insisting that the UN Charter and the laws of aggression does not apply to what they've done to Ukraine. I'm talking about Israel, justifying the most atrocious violations of international law, including of the Genocide Convention, and insisting that it does not apply to them because it's self-defense or because they are targeting a terrorist group. I'm talking about the United States, that has become the mouthpiece of Israel's arguments as well. And everyone supporting either one or the other has participated to the real erosion, if not annihilation, of the rule-based order. And I want to reiterate what I said. It is not that they are violating the law. This, you are right, has always happened. It is that they are saying that the law does not apply. And it's really a huge difference.
And what is the huge difference? What's the consequence of this?
The consequence in the first scenario, you still have international law. Those violating it still know it's important, still know it's something that is around.
So there's still guardrails.
And they are denying violating the law. In the current scenario, there is no guardrails. There is no law left. There is literally no international humanitarian law left after Israel's treatment of it in Gaza. There is nothing left in terms of the principle of distinction, in terms of the principle of proportionality, nothing. None of the key principles underpinning international humanitarian law have been left intact after 18 months. Not because they are violated, but because those violating it are saying we are violating it because it does not apply.
So what does that mean for the world?
That's why we're saying we are in an extremely alarming situation. Powerful states are trying to pretend there is no rule-based order and there are no guardrails. And those powerful states are intent to lead by chaos, to reinvent possibly the international system so that it best serve their interest. Those who 80 years ago built that system out of the ashes of World War II and the Holocaust, those states are now saying that system no longer works. We need to create a new one eventually. They have no plan for the new one, but what they do now is destroying the old order without any plan B and with absolute atrocious consequences for most people.
Is there any way of salvaging that old order? And if so, how?
Well, first, we need to absolutely highlight the fact that people are fighting back. Throughout 2024, we have had plenty of examples of governments or individuals insisting that the rule-based order must be upheld. That is why you have seen South Africa going to the International Court of Justice around the Israel genocide. You have seen Vanuatu going to the International Court of Justice around climate injustice. You have seen others going to the International Court of Justice around Israel's military occupation. There are many actors right now trying to hold Russia accountable for the crime of aggression against Ukraine. You have the International Criminal Court that have put out arrest warrants against President Putin, but also against Prime Minister Netanyahu. All of those are examples of an international system that is working.
Your critics, though, will say, Agnès Callamard, you are fixated on Israel. And we don't understand why. Why not be fixated on Sudan? Why not be fixated on Myanmar? What is it about Israel that's so egregious that you need to spend so much time talking about Israel?
Well, I'm not just talking about Israel. I was just giving you examples of how the international system has been working in 2024 in terms of holding the powerful actors to account. I absolutely agree with you that what's happening in Sudan is a catastrophe. We have issued a report not very long ago on the extent of sexual violence by the rapid forces.
The RSF.
Which is absolutely of a nature that we have not seen, or very rarely seen, I will say. The largest displacement of population in 2024. And yes, there is complete indifference to it internationally. It's not just me. It's actually Amnesty International has been working on Sudan, but the rest of the world has been pretty indifferent to the people of Sudan. The point I was making is that there are actors around the world right now that are trying to use the international rule-based system and to demonstrate that it is working and that it must work. Rodrigo Duterte, the Filipino president, is currently in front of judges in The Hague.
He once said he wanted to slap you.
Yes, exactly. And, he's responsible for thousands of killings. He ordered those killings. He corrupted the judicial system and the police. He was so powerful that he actually threatened to slap the US president. That man is now in jail in front of the Hague court. That is showing that the international justice system does work. And this is why it's being attacked. This is why it's becoming a battleground. And this is why we need to protect it. The point I want to make here is that we are all trying to ensure that what took 80 years to build is protected, not because we believe that everything was great over those last 80 years, not because we believe that nothing should be reformed, but because there is no alternative, and the progresses that have been made over those 80 years must be embraced, and we need to build on them. We do not destroy them by launching a crusade against gender equality, against racial equality, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Donald Trump has been in office for a little over 100 days now. What kind of effect has he had on, shall we call it, the human rights landscape since his coming to office?
A disastrous impact. He has not created the attacks on human rights. They were there. He's surfing on them and he's accelerating them. He's a super accelerator. That's how I call him. He's normalizing as well the attacks. He is suggesting the world over that attacking gender equality, attacking racial equality, attacking diversity, suggesting, in fact, that there is racial superiority, attacking freedom of expression, all of those things are something that must be commended and something that should be emulated and something that is actually quite normal. That is why he's so dangerous for the human rights system. He is giving would-be authoritarian leaders the justification and the normalization that they crave.
Does Amnesty International still matter? Given the state of affairs, given the state that we're in, is it still relevant?
I will say yes, it is still relevant. Why? Because people are still members of Amnesty International and we do not have a problem of membership. We are not losing our members. It matters because people cannot fight alone and people need to know that somebody has their back and Amnesty can have their back. Amnesty offers a platform, it offers collective engagement, it offers friendship, it offers a platform, it offers arguments, advocacy, tools to resist and to fight back.
It offers these things, but does it have influence anymore? Like, some people might argue that the Amnesty International of 2025 doesn't have the same kind of power that it might have had even 20 years ago, when Amnesty seemed to have the ability to affect the discourse, to affect the kind of conversations that were going on.
I think we do still affect the discourse. You're going to tell me that I am obsessing, but I think Amnesty report on the genocide of Palestinians had a big impact. So I do believe that the impact of Amnesty is absolutely different from what it was 20 years ago. We are in a different era with different actors, social media in particular. The construction of public opinion is very different now from what it was 20 years ago. We are looking for the best possible intervention that can deliver the kind of impact that we know is required. It doesn't mean that we are lacking in impact. I can still give you a long list of people who have been freed or protected in 2024 because of the action of our members. There is a long list of laws that have been repealed or that have been adopted because of our work. I think where we need to find new tools is when it comes to the culture. How do we impact society in a much deeper level, in the cultural dimension of the term? And that's what we need to work on. We also need to understand why so many young people move away from human rights and social justice and embrace anti-right narrative and action.
What's your explanation for that? Why do you think that's happening?
No, I don't know. That's why I said we need to understand it better. I know that here in Canada, a large proportion of the 18 to 24-year-old male population tend to be very anti-right. We need to unpack that better and we need to understand better. I think there is fear. I think there is an identity issue. I think we're failing young men, but I'm not quite sure yet what we need to do.
You were suggesting that I maybe thought that you were obsessed with Israel. I wouldn't say that I think you're obsessed, but perhaps some of your critics might think that you are obsessed with Israel. And I don't think you really fully answered that. Why do you think Israel needs to be talked about in this moment? Why is it such an important point for you? Because I looked at your report, and Israel plays a very important part of the annual report of Amnesty International this year. So why?
Of course. I mean, why in 2024? Because we have been made the witness of a genocide being broadcasted live days in, day out for the last, not just 12 months, the last 18 months. So, of course, we need to react to the fact that every day we see children and women being blown into pieces, social media, social videos, and so on, have gone the world over, demonstrating what is happening in Gaza and also in the West Bank. And we cannot just be indifferent to that. I mean, this is absolutely terrible. But I will say the reason why we have spent a lot of time on Israel in 2024 is because of the scale of what we were witnessing, because of the scale of the suffering, because it was an ongoing genocide, but also because of the complicity of the international community. As I have mentioned to you, what Russia's aggression of Ukraine and Israel genocide in Gaza to Amnesty International are the two factors that over the last few years have really brought international law and the rule of law on its knee. It is destroying it. And for the reason I have highlighted, because it is done with complete impunity, with the support of the most powerful state, that in the case of Russia is using its veto power at the Security Council to prevent any kind of meaningful Security Council resolution. In the case of Israel, it is the United States that has done so. And the result are the people. The people are the one suffering. Russia's aggression of Ukraine and Israel's genocide of Gaza are really those historical moments that could transform easily into an historical catastrophe.
Final question. The role of Canada, because you're here in Ottawa. Canada has a new Prime Minister, Mark Carney. What's your message to Canadians, to Canada, in terms of the role that you feel Canada could be playing, should be playing, in terms of advancing the human rights project?
So one of the reasons I'm here is because of the fact that Canada has emerged as one of the few countries that have dared to say no to Donald Trump, and that has stood fairly firm on a number of issues, including national sovereignty and trade. And we want to insist on the fact that Canada has modeled a behavior that it now needs to sustain and to strengthen, that it must build on its 80 years of leadership on human rights and continue to do so, particularly in an era where human rights protection is under such threat, least of which from its neighbor on the southern border. So we are calling on the Prime Minister to not to abdicate. Yes, you can find a deal on trade and tariff, but do not do so on the back of human rights protection and values. And we have made a number of recommendations to Canada so that it can really not just stand up and step up to Donald Trump, but really rise up as a human rights champion for the decades ahead.
Agnès Callamard, thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to In Bed with the Elephant on Ricochet Media. Producer and sound engineer, Dave Sarrazin. Executive producers, Ethan Cox and Andrea Houston. Music by Parker Harewood. Graphics, Connor Killoran. I'm Adrian Harewood. I'll talk to you next time.